The night was still. A heavy silence hung over the city, the kind of silence that pressed against the windows, waiting to be broken. The streets below had emptied hours ago, leaving nothing but the glow of streetlights and the faint hum of distant traffic. Yet, inside Song's apartment, the air was far from calm. For days, whispers had surrounded Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo's sudden absence. They had left without warning, their whereabouts unknown, and the void they left behind was suffocating. Song, who had been a quiet witness to their unspoken bond and their fragile moments, stayed behind in a shadowed apartment that felt too large for one soul. He thought he had prepared himself for the emptiness. What he had not prepared for was the sound that would come at midnight. It started faintly, a single knock. At first, Song thought it was nothing more than his imagination, the creak of old wood adjusting to the night's chill. But then it came again, sharp and deliberate. 3 knocks, each one louder, heavier, as though carrying a weight far greater than just a human hand. Song froze. His eyes darted to the clock. 12:03 a.m. exactly midnight had just passed. The timing felt uncanny, almost scripted. Whoever was at the door knew what they were doing. He didn't move. He simply stared at the door as though his stillness could make him invisible. But then came the 4th knock, slow, deliberate, and chilling. Whoever it was wasn't going away. The memory of Xiao Zhan's last words before leaving suddenly rang in Song's mind. If anything happens, don't open the door without thinking. Those words hadn't made sense then, but now they did. They were a warning. Song crept closer, each step echoing against the hardwood floor. The apartment seemed to shrink around him, the shadows growing deeper with every move he made. He stopped just short of the door, his breath caught in his throat. Slowly, he pressed his ear against the wood. Nothing. No sound of footsteps, no breathing, not even the faint rustle of clothes. Whoever was outside was waiting. He reached for the peephole, his hand trembling. And then he saw nothing. No one stood there. The hallway outside stretched long and empty, lit by the cold white glow of the overhead light. A wave of unease washed over him. The knocks had been real, but the hallway was deserted. Song pulled back, his heart pounding. But before he could even step away, a voice whispered from the other side. A low, broken murmur that seeped through the cracks of the door like smoke. "Open, please." The voice was fragile, almost pleading. It wasn't Xiao Zhan's. It wasn't Wang Yibo's. It wasn't anyone Song recognized. He stumbled backward, his mind racing. Should he answer? Should he call out? Every instinct screamed at him to remain silent. But the voice came again, louder this time, carrying an edge of desperation. "They're not safe, you have to know the truth." Song's blood ran cold. His mind flooded with questions. Who wasn't safe? What truth? And how did this stranger know about Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo? He nearly called the police, but something stopped him. Deep down, he knew this wasn't a matter the police could handle. This was tied to the mystery that had already ensnared Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo, the same mystery that had driven them into sudden disappearance. The knocking resumed, steady now, like the beat of a drum pulling him toward a decision. Each strike seemed to shake the walls of the apartment, until Song could no longer stand the weight of indecision. He grabbed the handle, but stopped himself just before unlocking it. Instead he whispered, "Who are you?" The silence that followed was unbearable. For a moment, he thought the stranger had gone. But then, almost against his will, he leaned closer to hear. That's when the answer came. Someone they trusted, someone who betrayed them. The words cut through Song like a blade. Betrayal. The very thing Xiao Zhan had always feared. The very shadow Wang Yibo had worked so hard to shield him from. And now, here it was at his doorstep, cloaked in midnight and whispers. Song's knees weakened. His thoughts spiraled. Could this be the missing piece? The reason for their sudden departure? Were they hiding because of this betrayal? And why was this person here now seeking him out? The air grew colder, unnaturally so. Song could see his breath fogging as though winter had slipped inside. The knocks stopped, replaced by a different sound, scratching. Fingernails or something sharper, dragging slowly against the wood. It was unbearable, maddening. He covered his ears, but the sound burrowed into his skull. And then it ceased. Silence again. Gathering every ounce of courage, Song peeked through the peephole once more. This time there was someone. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the door, their face hidden by the dim light. But what struck Song most was the object in their hand. A small, folded piece of paper, stained at the corner with something dark. The figure lifted it slowly, pressing it against the door, and whispered one final time, "Tell them before it's too late." And then, just like that, they were gone. The hallway was empty again, the paper sliding to the floor. Song stared at it for what felt like an eternity before daring to open the door. His hands shook as he picked it up. The paper was damp, the stain unmistakably blood. With trembling fingers, he unfolded it. Inside, only 6 words were scrawled in frantic handwriting. "They know. Run before they come." Song's vision blurred as panic consumed him. Who knew? Who was coming? And most importantly, where were Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo now? The midnight knock had not brought answers. It had only deepened the mystery, throwing him into a storm he never asked for. He stumbled back inside, locked the door, and collapsed against it, clutching the note to his chest. The silence of the night felt heavier than ever, pressing down on him like a curse. One thing was certain. Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo were in danger. And now so was he. What followed was a night of restless pacing, half-heard whispers, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. Song couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that whoever had left the note hadn't truly gone. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, made his heart race. By dawn he was a wreck. But the paper remained clenched in his hand, a reminder that something darker than betrayal lingered at the edges of their world. The midnight knock would forever haunt him, not just for what it revealed, but for what it promised. It was no longer just about Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo's disappearance. It was about survival, about secrets buried so deep they could only resurface in the dead of night. The clock ticked louder than it ever had before. Every second felt like a hammer against Song's chest, reminding him that he was no longer alone in the silence of his apartment. The knock was gone, yes, but its echo lived on, thrumming in his ears as though the door itself had absorbed the memory. Song sat slumped against the cold wood, the note clutched tightly in his hand. His mind reeled. The words were still burned into his vision. They know. Run before they come. Who was they? What did they know? And why had the stranger chosen him, of all people, to deliver this terrifying message? The floor beneath him creaked faintly as though shifting with his heartbeat. He lifted his head, eyes scanning the dimly lit room. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, heavier, alive. He felt watched even inside his own walls. The night, once a blanket of comfort, had transformed into a predator lurking just beyond reach. Every instinct told him to bolt, to grab his phone, call someone, anyone, and beg for help. But another part of him, the quieter, colder part, whispered that no one could be trusted. Not after hearing the stranger's words. Someone they trusted. Someone who betrayed them. That betrayal was the key, and maybe the same hands that had betrayed Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo were already reaching for him. His eyes flicked back to the note. The stain of blood had dried to a rusty brown, and yet its presence weighed more heavily than ink ever could. Blood meant urgency. Blood meant danger. Someone had been hurt delivering this warning. Someone had sacrificed to ensure he knew the truth. Song dragged himself to his feet, his legs trembling. The apartment suddenly felt too small, suffocating. He checked the peephole again, hoping perhaps that the figure had returned. But the hallway was empty, silent, endless. Still something gnawed at him. The stranger had left without footsteps, without sound. People didn't vanish like that. Not naturally. And then came the moment that nearly unraveled him. As he pulled away from the peephole, he caught it, just for a second, the faintest reflection in the glass. Face. Not his. Not anyone he recognized. Pale, hollow-eyed, with lips that seemed to mouth words he couldn't hear. He blinked and it was gone. The hallway stretched empty once more, but his pulse raced as though he had just stared straight into the eyes of a ghost. Song stumbled backward, crashing into the small table by the wall. A picture frame toppled, shattering on the floor. The sound was deafening, shattering the fragile silence like thunder. He froze, his breath sharp, his body stiff as stone. That's when it happened again. Knock. But this time it wasn't at the door. Came from the window. Low. Steady. Unmistakable. Song whipped around, his stomach dropping. He lived on the 6th floor. No one could be outside his window. No one human, at least. The curtains swayed gently as if stirred by a breeze, but the window was shut tight. His mouth went dry. The knock came again, louder, rattling the glass. He forced himself forward, each step heavier than the last. His fingers twitched as he reached for the curtain, and in one swift motion, he yanked it back. Nothing. The city lay sprawled beneath him, its lights glittering like stars. The night air was calm, undisturbed. But pressed against the glass was another piece of paper. Song's heart nearly stopped. He unlatched the window with trembling hands and snatched the paper away. Unlike the first, this one bore no blood. Only a single word, written in bold, hurried strokes. Listen. Before he could even process what it meant, the sound returned. A faint scratching, not at the door this time, not at the window, but everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the floor. It was as though his entire apartment had become a drum, and unseen hands were clawing to get in. Song collapsed to his knees, covering his ears, but the noise burrowed deeper, echoing inside his skull. He screamed, but his voice was swallowed whole by the relentless scratching. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence. Utter, suffocating silence. He sat there, shaking, the word listen burned into his mind. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted his head. That's when he heard it. Not a knock. Not a scratch. Voice. But this time it wasn't outside. It was inside. Run. The single word slithered through the air, so faint he almost believed it came from his own thoughts. But no, this was real. It was here. It was warning him, commanding him. Song's body jolted into motion before his mind caught up. He grabbed his phone, his keys, anything within reach, and bolted for the door. But when his hand hit the handle, he froze. What if the moment he opened it, whatever was out there, the stranger, the betrayer, the ghostly face, was waiting? His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, his hand hovering between freedom and doom. The apartment, once his sanctuary, was now a cage. And the midnight knock had been the key that unlocked it all. Every hair on his body stood on end as he realized the cruel truth. The note hadn't been a warning about what was coming. It had been a countdown.